His parents thought they could buy my marriage with a check. But what they didn't know was that I already held all the cards. And tonight, I finally showed them who I really was. Before we dive deeper, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to see who's really here. And don't forget to hit subscribe. This story only gets wilder. My name is Catherine, and I've spent the last 13 years building something extraordinary while everyone around me assumed I was just playing house. My marriage to Michael was never about his family's money, though I'm sure that's what they believed. When I first met Michael at Northwestern University in 2009, he was studying finance, and I was quietly teaching myself everything about venture capitalism through online courses at 2 a.m. He never knew that while we were dating, I was already running my first startup from a tiny apartment in Chicago, a digital marketing firm that was generating $50,000 a month in revenue by the time we got engaged. I didn't tell him because I wanted him to love me for me, not for what I could build. And honestly, I was tired of men seeing my ambition as a threat. So I kept it quiet. I built it quietly. I expanded it quietly. And by the time we married in 2011, my company had already been acquired by a mid-sized tech conglomerate for $3.2 million. I took that money and invested it in real estate across Denver, Cincinnati, and Nashville. 3 years later, I had 12 properties generating passive income of over $60,000 monthly. Michael knew about the acquisition. I couldn't hide that, but his family? They thought I'd cashed out early and was now enjoying a housewife's luxury. They had no idea that while Michael was climbing the corporate ladder at his father's company, Richardson and Associates, I was building a diversified portfolio that would eventually turn me into a multi-million-dollar operator. Michael's father, Robert Richardson, was the CEO of the family business. His mother, Patricia, spent her days organizing charity galas and commenting on other people's children. His sister, Amber, married a doctor and liked to remind everyone at family dinners about her respectable life. And then there was me, quiet Catherine, the girl who smiled politely while they talked about their country club membership and their vacation homes in the Hamptons. What they didn't know was that I owned 3 properties in the Hamptons. What they didn't know was that I had quietly purchased a minority stake in an AI software company called Neurosync Technologies, a startup that was about to revolutionize how hospitals manage patient data across America. What they didn't know was that my investment portfolio was worth more than Richardson and Associates' annual revenue. But the real kicker? The thing that would eventually change everything? Michael's father worked for me. Not directly, of course. But through a series of shell companies and strategic holdings, I had quietly acquired a 34% stake in Richardson and Associates 5 years ago. Every single day, Robert Richardson walked into his office, sat at his mahogany desk, and made decisions in a company where I held more power than he did. And he had absolutely no idea. I had done this not out of malice, but out of self-protection. When Michael and I were engaged, his father had taken me aside and said, "I hope you understand that if this marriage doesn't work out, we'll make sure you leave with nothing. Our family takes care of its own." It was meant to be a warning, a threat disguised as business pragmatism. So I decided right then and there, I would never be vulnerable to Robert Richardson's threats again. I would never be a woman dependent on his goodwill. I would own the very ground he stood on. And so the plan began. Through a financial advisor named Gerald Chun who worked in Kansas City, I started acquiring shares in Richardson and Associates. I was careful, patient, strategic. Every 6 months, another 2% stake acquired through a dummy corporation. Every quarterly meeting I attended as Michael's wife, I listened to his father boast about his leadership, his vision, his control over the company. And every single time, I knew the truth. I was more in control than he would ever be. Years passed. Michael and I were happy, genuinely happy. We traveled to Barcelona and Rome. We renovated our home in Westchester. We talked about having children, though we kept delaying it. Michael thrived in the family business, and I was genuinely proud of him. He was a good man, an honest man, but he was also his father's son, and I knew that eventually his father would try to exert control over our life. That moment came on a Saturday in October 2024. Michael called me while I was in my home office in Westchester, reviewing quarterly reports for Neurosync Technologies. My parents want us to come to dinner at the house, he said, his voice slightly strained. It's important. My father wants to discuss some things. I felt a chill run down my spine. I had trained myself to read between the lines, and those lines said, intervention. What kind of things? I asked carefully. Just family matters. Nothing serious, Michael said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. And I knew. I had been preparing for this moment for 5 years without even knowing it. Saturday evening came, and Michael drove us both to the family home in the suburbs, a sprawling Tudor-style mansion that Patricia had decorated with such excess it looked like a museum of wealth. We pulled up the circular driveway, and I took a deep breath. I was wearing a simple black dress, understated jewelry, and a Hermes bag that cost more than Robert Richardson's first car. I had learned long ago that true power doesn't announce itself. It whispers. Dinner was served at 7 p.m. sharp. Patricia had hired her favorite caterer from Manhattan, the one she used for her charity galas. The table was set with Waterford crystal and Limoges china. Fresh flowers from a florist in Boston were arranged down the center. It was a performance of wealth, and I recognized it immediately as a stage being set. We made small talk through the salad course. Amber was there with her husband, David, a cardiologist who worked at Mount Sinai. They talked about their recent trip to Monaco. Patricia mentioned her upcoming gala for the arts, which would raise money for some nonprofit in New York. Robert was unusually quiet, eating his salad methodically, occasionally glancing at his son. I knew that look. It was the look of a man preparing to deliver a speech he'd rehearsed in the mirror. As the main course was cleared, Chilean sea bass, prepared with a beurre blanc sauce, Robert set down his fork and picked up his wine glass. He didn't drink. Instead, he held it like a prop, a gesture meant to draw attention. Michael, he began, his voice measured and authoritative, your mother and I have been concerned about some things lately. Michael straightened in his chair. I continued cutting my fish, completely unbothered, though my mind was already 3 moves ahead. We love you, Patricia added, reaching over to touch Michael's arm, and we only want the best for you. David nodded supportively. Amber looked sympathetic. The staging was perfect. Everyone positioned to deliver the same message. We're doing this out of love. Catherine, Robert said, turning to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You're a lovely woman. We've always appreciated your creativity. Creativity. That was his word for my success. As if I'd been painting watercolors instead of building corporations. Thank you, I said warmly, taking a sip of wine. Pinot Noir from a vineyard in Napa. I could taste the terroir, the care in production. I had visited that vineyard. I had considered buying it. But we've noticed that you and Michael haven't been focused on what really matters, Robert continued. Family. Legacy. Children. The Richardson name carries weight in this country, and we'd like to see it continue. There it was. The real agenda. They wanted Michael to have a son. They wanted him to pass down the business, the legacy, all of it. And they wanted me to be a vessel for that legacy, nothing more. We've been thinking, Patricia said, pulling out an envelope from her clutch bag, that maybe you two need some support. A little incentive. She slid the envelope across the table toward us. It landed in front of Michael with a soft tap. He didn't open it. He looked at me, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. He knew something was wrong. He could sense it. Go ahead, Michael, Robert urged. Open it. I took another bite of sea bass, chewing slowly, deliberately. The moment stretched. Everyone at the table was watching to see my reaction. Amber was leaning forward slightly, eager for drama. David was trying to appear neutral. Patricia had that tight smile she got when she was executing a plan. And Robert was confident. So confident that he didn't see the trap he was walking into. Michael opened the envelope. Inside was a check. From where I was sitting, I couldn't see the amount, but I watched his face. His eyes widened. Then he looked at his father, then at me, then back at the check. This is $500,000, Michael said slowly. It's for a down payment on a house in Connecticut, Robert explained. Somewhere closer to the city, but with land. Space for children. We've already identified some properties. Our realtor has been looking. You'll need to start a family within 2 years, Patricia added, her voice sweet but firm. That's the condition. I set down my fork, took another sip of wine, looked at Michael, and then I did something I'd been waiting 13 years to do. I reached into my own bag, a vintage Hermes Kelly that I'd inherited from my grandmother, not purchased, because true luxury is often inherited or earned, never simply bought, and I pulled out 3 items. First, a business card. Not my personal card, but my professional one. The one that identified me as managing principal of the Meridian Capital Group. The one with my office address in Midtown Manhattan. The one that was printed on cardstock, so expensive it felt like holding a small sculpture. I placed it on the table, directly in front of Robert Richardson. Second, I pulled out a printout of my latest portfolio valuation, dated exactly 1 week prior. The number at the bottom read, $47,832,400. $47 million. Third, I pulled out a document. An official document from the Delaware Secretary of State's office. A document that listed me as the primary shareholder in Richardson and Associates, with a 34% stake in the family business. The controlling interest that I had quietly purchased over 5 years. Robert's hand froze midway to his wine glass. Patricia's face went pale. Amber literally gasped. David's eyes widened like he was watching someone perform heart surgery on himself. Michael looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time in 13 years. I don't understand, Michael said quietly. And his voice broke my heart because I could hear the betrayal in it, even though he didn't fully understand yet what there was to betray. I'll explain, I said calmly. But first, Robert, I need you to understand something. You offered Michael and me $500,000 as an incentive to have children. To continue your legacy. To build your dynasty. I gestured to the documents on the table. I'm worth nearly $48 million. I don't need your money. I don't need your approval. And Michael doesn't need to inherit your company because he's already part of something bigger than that. Robert's face had turned the color of raw salmon. How did you? He started. Quietly, I answered. The way ambitious people sometimes do. I bought my stake through shell corporations. My financial advisor in Kansas City handled most of the paperwork. You had no reason to notice because I never revealed myself. I did my research, made my moves, and protected my family's future. Why? Patricia whispered. And that was the real question, wasn't it? Because 13 years ago, I said, looking directly at Robert, you told me that if my marriage to Michael didn't work out, you'd make sure I left with nothing. You made me feel like I would always be vulnerable if I depended on anyone else. So I made a choice. I would never be dependent on you. I would never be at your mercy. And I would protect my family by making sure that you could never leverage your position as patriarch to control us. The silence at the table was absolute. Even the ambient sound of the house seemed to stop. No ticking clocks, no distant traffic, nothing. Just 5 people staring at me, and me staring back. I don't want to take over Richardson and Associates, I continued. I have no interest in running it into the ground or proving some point. But I want you to understand something, Robert. The power you thought you had over this family? It was always an illusion. And now you know it. The leverage you thought you held over Michael? It's gone. And the respect you demanded through intimidation? That's gone too. Michael reached over and took my hand. His hand was trembling. Catherine, he said, and there were tears in his eyes. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you would try to stop me, I answered honestly. And because I needed to do this for me. Not for you. For me. So I could sleep at night knowing that I was never trapped. Amber stood up from the table. This is insane, she said. You've betrayed the family. No. I replied calmly, I've protected my marriage. Your father betrayed my trust when he threatened me. I just made sure he never could again. David cleared his throat. This is probably a family conversation, he said diplomatically. Amber, and I should probably go. As they left the dining room, Patricia looked at her hands. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Robert stood up slowly. He looked older suddenly, like the knowledge had aged him 10 years in the span of 5 minutes. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "Nothing from you," I said. "I wanted you to know. That's all. I wanted you to understand that the world is bigger than your company, your legacy, your plan for Michael's future. And I wanted Michael to know that he was never supposed to be a pawn in someone else's game." That night, Michael and I drove home in silence. When we got to the house, we sat in the driveway for an hour just talking. He was angry at first, angry that I hadn't told him, angry that I'd done something so calculated and cold. But eventually he understood. He understood that I had been protecting myself because no one else had. He understood that love and self-protection aren't mutually exclusive. And he understood that his father had created this situation through his own threats and manipulation. "I would have loved you anyway," Michael said finally. "Even if you had nothing. You know that, right?" "I know," I said. "But I needed to know that I could love myself first." A week later, I received an email from Robert. His tone was professional, cordial even. He wrote, "Catherine, I owe you an apology. I spoke to you with disrespect when we first met, and I've come to understand that you were protecting your interests, just as I taught Michael to do in business. I would like to propose a meeting with you, Michael, and our legal team to discuss the future of Richardson and Associates in a way that acknowledges your stake in the company. I hope we can work together moving forward." I didn't respond immediately. I sat with that email for 3 days. I thought about revenge, about vindication, about power. And then I realized something. I had already won. The real victory wasn't in proving him wrong. It was in not needing to. I was rich enough that his approval didn't matter. I was secure enough that his respect wasn't required. I was powerful enough that his fear of me was simply an ancillary benefit. So I wrote back, "Robert, I accept your apology. And I'm open to a conversation about the future of Richardson and Associates. Let's schedule something for next month." Now here's where it gets interesting. Because that conversation led to other conversations. Those conversations led to strategy sessions. And those strategy sessions led to a complete restructuring of Richardson and Associates. I didn't become CEO. I didn't want to. But I introduced my investment partners to the company. I brought in consultants from Boston who had experience scaling family businesses. I helped Michael understand that he didn't have to choose between loving his father and protecting himself. And slowly, quietly, something shifted. Robert became less of a tyrant and more of a mentor. Patricia started asking me genuine questions about business instead of critiquing my fashion choices. Amber stopped trying to prove herself and started living her own life. Michael and I decided not to have children, and you know what? His parents accepted that. Because they finally understood that their leverage was gone, that their approval was no longer required, that we were free. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to Olive Revenge Stories, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. 6 months after that fateful dinner, Michael and I took a vacation. We flew to Bali, rented a villa overlooking the ocean, and spent 2 weeks reading books, swimming in infinity pools, and talking about our future. Not the future his father had planned. Not the future his mother expected. Our future. We talked about the possibility of adopting. We both wanted to be parents, just on our own timeline. We talked about potentially buying a vacation home in Costa Rica. We talked about the company I was considering starting, a venture capital fund focused on supporting female entrepreneurs, something I'd been thinking about for years. And Michael asked me something I'll never forget. If you could do anything in the world without any constraints, what would you do? I thought about it for a long time. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because the question itself was powerful. When I had been younger, when I was building my first startup in that tiny Chicago apartment, I couldn't have asked myself that question. There were too many constraints. Real constraints, financial, social, familial. But now? Now I actually had a choice. I'd invest in women, I said finally. I'd create opportunities for women who didn't have the access that I eventually found. I'd teach them how to build wealth quietly, how to protect themselves, how to become so powerful that they never have to ask for permission. Michael nodded. He already knew this about me, but I think he appreciated hearing it said out loud. By September of that year, I had founded the Katherine Richardson Fund for female entrepreneurs. Yes, I kept my married name. It felt fitting somehow to reclaim it and redefine it on my own terms. The fund started with $5 million of my own capital, and I partnered with other female investors in New York to expand it. We invested in 37 female-led startups in the first year. By the end of year 2, 14 of those startups had achieved profitability. 3 had been acquired. 1, a SaaS platform for supply chain management based in Atlanta, was valued at over $200 million. And none of those women had to hide their power. None of them had to keep their success secret to appease a father-in-law. None of them had to calculate every move based on someone else's ego. The irony, of course, is that Robert Richardson eventually learned about the fund. He read about it in Forbes. And instead of being threatened, he was impressed. He reached out and asked if he could contribute. Patricia volunteered for the board. And while I'll never fully trust Robert the way I trusted Michael, we developed something that resembled a genuine working relationship. He started to understand that when you elevate other women, you don't diminish yourself. You just expand the world. Years passed. Michael's career evolved. He eventually left Richardson and Associates to start his own management consulting firm, advising mid-sized tech companies. He was brilliant at it. And yes, I was his first investor, though that's a story for another time. My portfolio continued to grow. NeuroSync Technologies went public in 2023. I made over $70 million on that investment alone. I bought a penthouse in Manhattan overlooking Central Park. I became a regular on the Forbes 30 Under 50 list. Okay, I'm 45 now, but I made it 4 times before I aged out. And somewhere along the way, something shifted. The anger that had driven me to build an empire in secret started to fade. It was replaced by something more powerful: purpose. I realized that I hadn't built all of this just to prove something to Robert Richardson. I had built it because I had something to offer the world. I had a mind for business. I had a talent for seeing opportunity where others saw risk. I had a commitment to lifting up women who were where I had been. And that was enough. More than enough. But there's one more thing you need to know about this story. Something I haven't told anyone except Michael. 2 years after that dinner, Robert Richardson had a heart attack. It wasn't fatal. He was at the office in Connecticut when it happened, and someone called an ambulance immediately. He spent a week in cardiac care. And when he got out, something had changed in him fundamentally. He stopped working so much. He started spending time with Patricia. He took up sailing. He became kinder, softer. I asked Michael once if he thought the heart attack had scared Robert straight, and Michael said, "No. I think he finally realized what he'd been afraid of all along." "What's that?" I asked. "That nobody needed him," Michael said. And once he accepted that, he became the person people actually wanted to be around. I haven't told this story in detail to many people because for years, I was afraid of being judged. I was afraid that people would think I was cold, calculating, cruel. I was afraid that they would see me as a villain in my own narrative. But I've come to understand that protecting yourself is not cruelty. Standing up for your own interests is not calculating. And building wealth on your own terms is not a betrayal, it's a reclamation. I tell this story now because I'm 45 years old, and I've earned the right to be honest about who I am. I'm a woman who was threatened, so I built a fortress. I'm a woman who wasn't believed, so I proved herself through numbers that couldn't be denied. I'm a woman who was underestimated, so she learned to use that underestimation as a competitive advantage. And I'm a woman who is still learning, still growing, still figuring out what it means to have power and use it wisely. Michael and I just celebrated our 13th wedding anniversary. We didn't have children, and we're genuinely happy about that choice. We travel frequently. We work on projects that excite us. We've built a life that feels authentic and genuine. And Robert Richardson? He and I actually have lunch sometimes. We talk about business. He tells me about his sailing expeditions. I tell him about the latest cohort of female founders I'm working with. It's strange having a relationship with someone who once threatened me, but it's also redemptive in a way. He became human to me, not a villain, not an obstacle, just a person who is terrified of losing control and who eventually learned to let go. So, here's what I want you to understand about this story. It's not really about revenge. It's about self-respect. It's about recognizing that nobody, not your parents, not your in-laws, not your society, gets to define your worth. Your worth is something you build brick by brick, choice by choice, investment by investment. It's about understanding that the most powerful thing you can do is become so self-sufficient, so confident, so genuinely excellent at what you do that other people's approval becomes irrelevant. And it's about knowing that when you reach that place, you have the option to be generous. You can choose kindness without fearing that it makes you weak. You can extend grace without worrying that it makes you vulnerable. Because nothing can touch you anymore. Nothing can shake you. You've already proven to yourself that you can survive anything. And that's the real empire. Not the money, though the money is nice. Not the properties, though they're very nice. Not even the respect, though that's pretty nice too. The real empire is the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of. I'm Katherine Richardson, and this is my story. And if you're listening, I want you to know something. You have more power than you realize right now. The power to build. The power to protect yourself. The power to create an empire that no one can take away from you. All you have to do is decide that you're worth it. Because you are. You really are. Thank you for listening to all of Revenge Stories. If this resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me your story. Where did you find your power? How did you protect yourself? What empire are you building in silence? I want to hear from you. We're building something here together, a community of people who understand that quiet power is the most devastating kind.